Priyanka, welcome to the podcast. I'm so pleased that you're here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
What is your journey to becoming an entertainment lawyer? Like traditionally, I have friends who've been to law college and become M&A, corporate, those kind of lawyers. Entertainment law. Tell me about that.
For me, it just happened to be the best, two different worlds coming together. I had worked for a long time before starting to practice as a lawyer, as a writer in the entertainment industry. This is pre-social media, pre-OTT and streaming services and all of that, right? And I was assisting someone who reached out, and we landed Lata Mangeshkar as our first ever client. And really, I think for me, that was the beginning of a very long journey in FA.
I mean, that's really quite a start.
Thank you. It is, I agree with that. I think it's quite a start. And when you work with someone as iconic as her, it's really just looking forward from there on, right? So I think because we started with her and then moved on to representing Sohan Nigam, who at the time was, one of the most sought after, he still is, but really at the absolute peak of his career. And then one thing led to another. It was Kalyanji, Anji for something else. And a lot of this was still disputes, right? So the core of it was still me doing a lot of commercial litigation work. It just so happened that the client was from entertainment. And then one thing led to another. Before you knew it, because of Didi and Sonu, I feel everybody in their ecosystem started coming to me for advice. And before I knew it, we were looking at a very dynamic roster of talent that became clients.
What is it like dealing with someone like Lata Mangeshkar?
It has been the absolute greatest privilege of my life and career. Right? I continued serving her as her advisor right up until she passed away. And even today, I continue helping the family administer the entire Mangeshkar estate. For those of you who don't know, it's a lesser known fact. We started a record label for her called LM Music back in 2012-13. It was the first board that I served on. I still continue sitting on the board of LM Music. I think a lot of firsts in my career.
So when you say entertainment, tell me what journalist that guy is.
That is an interesting one, because I think entertainment has also become all-encompassing, right?
It's even just you and me sitting and talking during this podcast is also now part of entertainment.
You're absolutely right. And there was some very interesting podcasts that we've advised on behind the scenes in terms of what happens to the rights and what's the ownership. But coming back to your question on entertainment and what all it sort of encompasses, I think for us really broad strokes would be film, TV, music, right? And then you go into social media, you go into gaming, sports, fashion, advertising, and it all sort of then branches out into, when I say film and TV, there's OTT, you've got web series, you've got feature films, you've got theatrical, music. Obviously, there's a whole world within itself. With social media, you've got branded content, you've got creators and influencers, and what their relationship looks like. So many different podcasts that we advise on, get involved in. So I feel it's literally anything and everything that you're consuming on your screen.
But tell me now, artists, talent, it's almost like an omnipresence, right? They're on social media, they do concerts, they're doing appearances, they're doing co-collaborations, they're investing in companies, they're getting married, it's so omnipresent and all-encompassing.
Yes.
Working on a contract now.
We're all advising them on exactly all of these things I just spoke about, right? And I think whenever someone asks me, what do you do? I think the simplest answer is that you're really advising them across so many different aspects of their careers, both on and off screen. I think, so look, I'll say this, right? I feel some of the foundation has been there, right? Because look at it this way, especially in a country like India, we're one of the biggest producers of movies in the world. This is culturally so heavily a part of our DNA, right? So we've had a lot of industry practice, a lot of commercial contrasts have been in place, but when I look at technology today and how much it's permeated all aspects of entertainment, you're absolutely right that it involves a level of innovative thinking, some amount of creative thinking, even a part of attorneys, right? Where, listen, how do you, in a sense, we're sitting with a crystal ball without actually having whether you look at a crystal ball, right? But you're just constantly sort of speculating that, okay, if we do this, then what, right? Or how is this piece of content that I create going to be perceived or received or exploited, monetized 10 years from now, 50 years from now, right? How am I coming generations going to benefit or not from everything that I'm creating today? So I think in that sense, there's a lot more heavy lifting that we've had to do to always think of how is this going to look in the future, right? And even currently, I think the landscape has changed so much. You've got so many PE and VC funds that are so heavily involved in entertainment. Like you rightly said, artists, for example, have become far more savvy, right? They're investing in sports league. They've got entities in which they hold equity. Most endorsements today for at least bigger talent tends to be a hybrid form of, me having some equity as well as getting a fee. So I think as attorneys, we've had to be more and more dynamic. On any given day, you're dabbling between understanding the corporate world, looking at M&A, looking at the company's law, to on a given day, understanding defamation, looking at sexual harassment, looking at narcotics. I feel like there's anything and everything. And I feel for the outside world, sometimes it's very, it's easy to lose sight of how much you need to be on your toes and how much you constantly need to be on top of things, right? And I'll give a simple example. So often, today we'll see artists or talent that gets involved in a controversy, right? Something that they could have said, half realizing that it's going to upset a certain group of persons, it's going to create an uproar, it's going to talk about like a legal kind of. Not even that, right? But let's say I've said something that's considered offensive. And before I know it, I'm being trolled on social media, people are getting upset. That has a repercussion sometimes. My contracts could be cancelled, I could be dropped off a show. I'm going to have to call off an entire tour. It can have all sorts of repercussions. And behind the scenes, you would have agents, managers, attorneys like I figuring out how do you problem solve, right? So much so sometimes we'd even end up looking at statements that are being published or not being published, right? Even that's good advice. That listen, you should know when to stay quiet. So I feel really our role today has become both how to behind the scenes come up with good commercial structure for the talent that we work with, and at the same time how to firefight. But I think the mark of a good attorney today is someone who is going to have full empathy and regard to what you deal with professionally in your life, both on and off screen.
And especially with artists, right, who are so exposed to the public and vulnerable in that sense, while they benefit from it. There's a lot of vulnerability now that they have because they are on display all the time. And there is downtime. So you're also advising Sushmita Sen.
Yes.
You're a lawyer. She's one of my concerned favorites. I am kind of her generation. Yeah. Who would you say are some of the very sort of modern, savvy currents? Someone that you're going into a room with.
Yeah.
And you're going to help them negotiate a contract. Or you're going to talk to them what your fees or whatever it may be. Or would you say, okay, I have to sit straight and like this person is listening and knows their stuff?
I think Sushmita is definitely on the top of this list.
Yeah.
She will give most attorneys a run for their money. People will be surprised to hear this. Yeah. And that's not to say that, she's someone who is going to be aggressive or drive a hard bargain. I think people have, it's very easy to misconstrue that because everybody has such a stereotype of what a good lawyer is supposed to be. But I don't think I've seen anyone with more attention to detail. If we ever have to, Sushmita will proofread a document and she will find something tiny. God forbid if it's still in there, right? But I admire that level of perfection and attention to detail. The other thing I feel is, I love the fact that she understands that, listen, I'm giving someone my written word. It's got to mean something. There's some sanctity to a contract, right? That's why we're doing this. So I feel she's definitely somebody that we've enjoyed working with tremendously. Obviously also a personal favorite because of everything that she stands for and embodies. And I think in that sense, I personally have been very lucky to work with really strong, cool women. There's so much to learn and you have so much fun working together because they let you push the boundaries of, what can and cannot be done. And I don't like taking no for an answer, personally. every time I'm negotiating, looking at sound, saying it, I'll be like, "Nahi, par ye nahi ho sakta." You know, it's never been done before.
Yes.
So I love it.
You welcome that statement. Okay.
Yes. Okay, but you know, that's always a first. So I think Sushmita is definitely one of those. So it's a lot of fun working with her.
What about things like digital assets, ownership?
Right.
You know, when things get out also, right? How do you handle IP today and ownership today and digital assets?
When you say digital assets, would you mean brand name,
Yes.
trademark,
Yes.
what people have put,
Yes.
anything that I've created that's my IP in the
Yes.
digital world?
Absolutely.
Okay, I think lots of things, you know, and I feel as far as this aspect is concerned, in my experience, most creators, most influencers, even online businesses that we work with are unfortunately ignorant.
Yeah.
I think we're living in a day and age where everything is instant. You want everything quick, and jaldi, right? This urgent or urgency culture that we have. And I think often it comes at the cost of completely compromising your rights and being proactive or vigilant about protecting your assets, right? And tiny examples, so often we'll see that somebody is doing something on social media. Let's say you started something, you've created a brand, or you've created some persona. That's your online persona, right? And it has certain copyright in it. You see somebody else doing it, we will go on a rant about it. You might, say something on social media, disgruntled, but when I ask the client that, hey, what's the legal follow-up to this? What action are you taking? None.
Yeah.
Right? And you don't even need to come to an attorney today, right? And where the beauty of also living in a digital ecosystem is that there's so many tools available to you. You're, for someone who's a YouTuber, for example, you've got such a robust notice and takedown mechanism. There are those 3 tiny dots. It starts with that. But 9 out of 10 times, no one has bothered exploring it. Right? And it gives you so much intel into how to protect your copyright, how to look after your channel, what are good community guideline practices, what sort of content is acceptable, not acceptable, can get you into trouble, what can get your content taken down. It's all TLDR, as the Gen Z like to say it. And yeah, and
Sorry, please expand.
too long didn't read. I hope I said that right. So I think that's the day and age we're living in, right? So I feel digitally, there's so much that technology is able to do to help you monetize your content, to help you protect your content.
Yeah.
But equally, I think it comes down to how proactive and how vigilant you want to be about monetizing and protecting the brand that you're building online. So I always would advocate and say that there is enough and there's more that people should be doing.
Tell me about a complex case that you've handled.
That's
Which took you out of your comfort zone. You obviously don't have to give names, but navigating through a very complex case.
I think I'm probably going to say 2 because those are the ones that stand out the most in my career. One was early on, right, as a young attorney, we were leading a massive class action lawsuit on behalf of music composers and lyricists. And the reason that was significant at the time is I think we were up against something that was much, much bigger than even the class of authors and lyricists that we were acting for. The law had just been amended, so we were testing new voters.
Yes.
But it's significant because we succeeded in what we were doing, so much so that I think it has shaped the current structure of
What writers get, and what
they own,
Yes.
how the society that is responsible for collecting and making these payouts to them functions, the structure and the makeup of that society. So I think it's such a big part of my career today in what I do. So I'm I always look back at that and look at the significance that it's had all through my professional journey. And I think another one that again stands out quite a bit is because we almost sort of had our global eyes on this one. It was just on the eve of the launch of a very significant music streaming service that we today consume in the country. But this is on the eve of their launch in this country, and we were acting for a very big global music rights holder, and it involved licensing of IP, and I won't get into the details of that because it's very, very complex. But again, we had everyone watching, holding their breath, thinking, what is an Indian court going to decide? And it could sort of really affect the way the commerce of this industry operates, right? And I feel for me, those always have been the ones that stand out the most. I think
You're making an impact on an industry, not just an individual.
correct. With entertainment, it's where even in contracts, most of it is really commercial at the end of the day. Even when you're negotiating something, your deliverables, your fee structure, how does the ownership of what does the ownership of IP look like? What happens if you don't turn up on set on time? What happens if you get involved in a controversy? And each one of these has a commercial ramification first.
Yeah, absolutely. You also work with some international Indian artists, right? Like an AP Dillon.
Yes.
And you negotiated a fantastic contract. Is the buzz for AP Dillon for Lola Palusa?
Yes. Thank you. That was last year.
Yeah.
Again, AP is a special client just because of the kind of music, the kind of journey he has had. I think there's been a lot of firsts with him as well. Besides AP, I think there's a lot of other rappers that we end up working with, like Divine Ravine is another one. He's very special. We did something with Badsha a few years ago. I absolutely enjoy working with a lot of the rappers and hip hop just generally as a genre of music. I enjoy listening to it. I love working with them. So that's one. And I also feel just generally at the moment, a lot of the South Asian talent is clearly having a huge moment on the world stage, right? There's just so many opportunities that have come up. I think never before have I seen artists do deals of this size, or you've got artists that are touring North America, or getting signed to global shows, getting signed to major record labels. So I feel that's the fun part of being involved in the industry in its current ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point.
Sometimes we represent filmmakers or showrunners of Indian origin who could be directing a big Netflix original show, right, or an Amazon show. So I feel it really boils down to, hey, who are you rendering who are you being engaged by rendering your services to? Where is it being exploited? And then, sometimes we have completely a different nuance to look at, which is got less to do with day-to-day IP, but let's say they're of Indian origin, but have decided to lose their base outside of the country. That there's a lot of what we call commercial restructuring that's involved, right? In terms of where is the entity based out of, how are we contracting? There could be tax associated with it. So I feel that's also areas where they need advice, because India is an important part and territory of what they end up doing.
So you also represent eminent comedic heroes like Vedas, who I'm a big fan of.
Me too.
But he does get into trouble.
We try to keep him out of that hour, and I think we've succeeded for the most part.
I think you have, actually. But how do you deal with some of the statements that are received in a way that's possibly not how he meant to deliver them? Because comedians walk a fine line, right?
I think so, and especially in the current environment that we're in, I feel it's a really, really tricky profession to be a part of. We worked with Veer for almost a decade now, I forget, possibly more. He's, again, I think amongst going back to one of the first questions that you asked me, one of the clients who we absolutely enjoy working with, extremely intelligent, very smart, very savvy, understands what they're doing, understands the importance of getting the right legal advice. So he's always been a joy to work with. But with comedy itself, I think not everyone has an appetite for humor. And it's as unfortunate as it is the truth of the environment we're living in. I remember there have been times where we've had to cancel a show or put out a statement clarifying our stance. But I think with what people probably don't realize is, and not just with Veer specifically, but with a lot of material that's being created today, there's actually a whole detailed, what we call clearance process, right? We're reading scripts, we're vetting jokes, we're listening to music so that the lyrics are not offensive, we're watching movies or shows before they're being released. I mean, back in the day, clearance was limited to, okay, am I infringing somebody's trademark, copyright, if I use something unknowingly, that could be a problem. But today, the fact that we have an entire team that's devoted to reading every single piece of content before you're creating. So I think we're all the more sensitive and careful before something is happening. That being said, I think as far as most of the creators or talent or comedians themselves are concerned, I think for the large part, their priority is their audience, right? That they should be safe. So even at times if you're faced with a situation where, there could be a commercial repercussion to canceling a show last minute, versus a safety issue, because there could have been some sort of disruption at the venue, etc. I feel it's almost always the safety of their fans and audiences that prevails. But coming back to the role that you play, I think in that sense, in that moment, you've got to help the client make that commercial call that, hey, what do we want? Because one could, there's a short-term commercial gain versus a long-term reputational risk.
What would you say are the most commercially viable contracts for you? Like which area?
I think across industries, right, within entertainment, I would say what is a good contract is one that is commercially balanced. I'd put it like that, right? Because many times, and especially with, I think, the ecosystem that we're all a part of, contracts tend to be lopsided. And I think even the way a lot of us approach negotiating contracts is, it's my way or the highway, or feeling shortchanged, right, depending on which end of the contract you're at, or or the bargain that you're driving. But I personally feel that the sign of a good contract is the one that's a commercially balanced contract. And I keep saying this to clients all the time. This is not, either Yuvan or Ivan. If people have to go in with this flex and, getting so personally offended. And you and I have been part of, I'm sure, enough of these negotiations where you've seen egos erupt and tempers fly across the room.
Definitely.
And that's not the sign of a good negotiation, definitely not a sign of a good contract. And see, how is that relationship going to turn out if it started off like that, right? So how is one going to ever be happy in a relationship that started off like that? And with most clients, I will always say that every relationship that you have contractually is a commercial give and take.
Yes.
You have to agree to what makes you comfortable. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is either we don't talk about it on day one, right? Or we've talked about it, said, haan, theek hai, dekh lenge, whatever, it doesn't matter, just sign it. And then when something goes wrong, you're going back to that piece of paper, then expecting someone to act in good faith.
Yeah.
But by then it's always
needs to be worked out earlier.
Yeah, and I think this whole culture that we have, and I personally feel, having practiced in a bunch of different places and with different stakeholders in different parts of the world, I think culturally, it's a very India thing to feel offended if someone wants to negotiate a contract, no matter who you are. I don't understand where that comes from. People get upset. It's almost a how dare you, and God forbid you bring an attorney into negotiation.
Because stakes do change, right?
Of course,
They really do change. Environment changes, circumstances change, the scope of a business changes. And contracts have to evolve with that. And both parties have to evolve with that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not today, even circumstances change all the time. Who I am at the beginning of a relationship may not be who I am as that relationship evolves, right? My position might be different. The product that we've created might, be in a far different standing than what we thought or we conceived would happen. So I just feel like even today, it amazes me when, I have executives reach out to clients and say, नहीं, but why are you getting her involved? हम आपस में करेंगे, right?
So you've probably negotiated with some monster number corporations, your Amazons and your Netflixes and studios in India and whatnot. When they see a woman walk in, a young woman walk in, to sit down and do these negotiations, are you ever underestimated?
I think that's going to be an episode in itself.
I think we're going to need one.
Underestimating, I think, happens more often than not. Because I think when you walk in, they look at you, they've made a certain assumption of what you could be because of the way you look. And then I get remarks like, oh, but she's so sweet. Till then you start talking and get down to business, and now they're suddenly upset or angry because, oh, why are you not being sweet? You look a certain way, so how can you not act a certain way, right? But I'm like, you made that assumption entirely on your own. So it's either that treatment or the other treatment is where my reputation precedes me. Where like, oh, she's going to drive a hunt party, oh, she's going to be, she's going to act difficult. This act difficult, I feel like,
It's reserved for women.
Is reserved for women, which is odd.
And again, act difficult for women.
Yeah, and I've seen enough men do it. Because I work with talent across the board. I think anyone who's talented is going to act difficult, and I feel rightly so. Because they are driving for a certain degree of perfection, or they want something that obviously the average person in the room is not thinking about or asking for. So I feel being difficult is really gender neutral. You could be anyone, but you have, there's nothing wrong about you being difficult about something, so be it. So I think, underestimating happens all the time, or the fact that, oh, but you just gotta look up, you just gotta show up in a room and everything will magically fall into place. No, of course not, right? I mean, if all I had to do was look a certain way, and that's all it took, I don't think my career would have panned out the way it did, right? That's not what is keeping people out of jail. That's not what is getting people these, multi-million-dollar contracts. That's not what is helping people sustain these dynamic, multifaceted careers. So I'm sorry, it takes more than just looking pretty.
Absolutely. The numbers are not so big, Priyanka. As you were saying, that what a time to be in this industry. Yeah. Because you've got VCs, you've got investors, you've got studios, you've got contracts being negotiated internationally. Yeah. The size and scale, I mean, Alia Bhatt has been appointed global brand ambassador of L'Oreal, Gucci, Deepika with Cartier.
She acted for her.
These are now you have. Okay. Yeah. She, I would imagine, is another very clever, detail-oriented person, right?
And be detail-oriented.
Yeah. Do you feel like now the younger generation with this kind of money are very, very savvy and particular and even knowledgeable about what they want?
I would say perhaps 50-50. Okay. To be honest, most of them, I think, still neglect financial education. I think it's still, for the large part, a parent handling it, or your spouse handling it, or partner, or best friend. It's still very, very disorganized. And maybe that's very specific to entertainment. But you'd be amazed how many of them, for the most part, don't even have a lawyer or think that it's important to have a lawyer. Some of the biggest names in this country actually will probably do most of their contracts on a handshake, or have
through a manager,
negotiator. That's the other thing.
But doesn't that leave them very vulnerable?
It does, and I think that's
especially with these kind of numbers.
Hell yeah, it very much does. I think the ones who are really on the top of their game understand it and are savvy, and will not try to DIY it, right? This DIY is a big problem, I feel, with some of these areas, right? But they will get the right professional help around them. So you get the right financial advisor, get the right accountant, get the right tax advice, get the right legal and commercial advice. But for the most part, and you'd be amazed, Dave, now with how few of them are actually savvy, care about it. The other thing is, I think for them, it's an added expense, right? That, oh, but why am I bearing legal fees or costs? And that sometimes, most of the time, actually is a deterrent.
Because they don't see the value of it.
They don't see the value of it. And it's unfortunate, because I can tell you, almost every single time in my experience that an artist or a talent has resisted having to seek legal advice in the beginning of their careers, has always found themselves in a soap few years later, where you probably end up spending 10 times more than you needed to on day one, had you just kept your house in order.
Mentors, anyone you admire in the industry, or people who helped you?
Yes, many mentors. And this is something I do want to share with everyone who's listening. Irrespective of gender, you have to actively have mentors. Yeah. And I think a lot of the people looking for mentors misunderstand, right? There's this specific hunt for like, oh, I want this person to be my mentor. That's not how a mentor-mentee relationship works. I think it's any natural relationship that evolves. There'll be different people at different points of time in your career who are going to naturally be mentors for you. You'll end up doing it. But I feel, for me, clients have been mentors. I think definitely Lata Mangeshkar and Sushmita are at the top of that list. I've admired so many different aspects of their personalities. Lata Mangeshkar and her humor, right up to, in her 90s, and just being so straight-faced about certain things, and you expect that she's going to be, again, this like soft and demure, which she was, but she was also very firm about what she wanted and had such a cool demeanor about how she went about doing it. There was never raising her voice. There was never like, no, I'm going to throw a tantrum, but it was just this calm, self-assured, reinstated persona where like, this is what I want. And you go figure, kind of a thing, right? But to be so sure. So I feel they have been mentors. There's a gentleman called Charles Goldstack, who is a very, very loved music executive in the US. He has been a client, and I personally have always turned to him whenever I've needed advice, whether it's on the business front, because I feel a lot of what I've built is really, it's very entrepreneurial, right? And I don't think anyone looks at people who run law firms as business owners or as entrepreneurs, but it is, especially when you're setting up something that's in entertainment, that's so first of its kind. Think about it, right?
Nothing. Last tip. Give me 3 attributes that you think have helped you achieve what you have so far about yourself.
I
don't be humble. Just go for it.
Terrible. Like, I think 3 attributes definitely. One is I'm a perfectionist. I think there is a great amount of detail, attention to detail, and I think it frustrates people around me, and rightly so. And I think the younger the kids that I'm working with, the more it's like, what is she fussing about? But I just feel a good work product is a good work product. It'll always stand by you. There are times where I'll have a client calling me up 8 years later and saying, Priyanka, I opened this document and I was so relieved that, even though things have changed so much in technology, saying you actually covered this, he felt so
You're protected.
happy
Yeah.
that,
With those details.
foresight. So I just feel like paying attention to detail. Number 2, I'm hyper competitive.
Yeah.
I'm very competitive. I get upset. Everything is emotional. And I know a lot of people have told me throughout my career that, let's stop it. And, Janamba actually that you were talking about included, that don't be so emotional about it. But I feel everything's personal, everything's emotional, and that's why I fuss about it so much. And I'm very, I think everything, it will upset me if something that I have done, I've put in everything and it's still not gone, it's gone to somebody else, or it didn't go out the way I wanted it to. So yes, I'm very, very hyper competitive and emotional. And I think the last quality is knowledge. And I say this all the time, there is no replacing knowledge. You can get a lot of information from the internet, and I'm all for it. Read as many blogs as you need to, listen to as many podcasts as you need to, but none of that is a substitute for core knowledge. And I think it's something I consciously invest a lot of my time and energy in. Even if I've heard something, read something, I want to go down.
Must be constantly updating. You have to. I look at internet precedents as well and contracts.
Everything. I think it's just about precedents, about having curiosity, right? That, hey, but why are they doing a certain thing in a certain way? I think that you don't question it enough number of times, you aren't going to be satisfied. So feel free to ask what if, be curious. That's how you build knowledge. That's how you accumulate knowledge. So I would say those are some of the things that I think have helped me.
Priyanka, if ever I was in trouble, I would want you in my corner.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Thank you.
That's a pleasure.